Across the country, the idea of criminal justice reform has been gaining momentum, and much of it is focused on bail. The Department of Justice estimates that 65% of the people being held in local jails have not been convicted of a crime. Rather, they're awaiting court hearings and they cannot afford the bail to get out.
So Massachusetts has a new bail system that tries to address that issue. And joining us tonight is the state senator who authored that bill, William Brownsberger of Belmont. Thank you so much for coming in.
Very glad to be with you.
We appreciate having you on. So tell us, your bill signed into law this May, I believe, by Governor Charlie Baker. It does a lot of things. We want to focus specifically on the bail aspect of it. What is the new law in Massachusetts on bail?
Well, what our bill does is build on what the Supreme Judicial Court did about a year ago in the Brangen case, which emphasizes that judges have to consider what a defendant can afford when they set bail. They have to look at the defendant's assets. You shouldn't set a bail at $1,000 if someone has no money and you're just trying to assure their return to court. So that's idea number one, is consider affordability. And then idea number two, and where we took that is we took it one step further and we said, and ask the question, is it really worth it? Do we really need to hold that person? Is the Commonwealth's interest in holding that person so great that it justifies the harm that will come from even one day being held on bail? And then the other important thing we did, so those are legal standard changes, and the other thing we did was try to initiate a pretrial services department so that we can make it easier for people to come back to court. So if you go to the dentist's office, or you have an appointment rather, you're going to get a text the day before and a text the day of, show up. We don't do that to defendants. And we're talking about defendants, a lot of people who may be very disorganized in their lives, have a lot of troubles, and we say, be here in 6 weeks.
And then they don't show up.
And then they don't show up and you're surprised.
It's a cycle.
Exactly. If the dentist can do it, the courts can do it too, right? Further, the new law created a commission, which is going to make suggestions about how to improve the whole process. What do you think some of those improvements might be?
Well, this is a very... we pass laws in the legislature, but then there are hundreds of thousands of cases every year. There are a few hundred judges on the benches. So what is actually going to happen out there is a question mark. So what we want to do is see whether we accomplished our goal. What are the goals? Of course, we want to keep dangerous people off the street, and that's not about bail. We have a thing called a dangerousness hearing. That's different from bail. If somebody's dangerous, doesn't matter what the money is. There's no question about money, but you have to prove that to a certain extent. You don't have to convict them, but you have to show with evidence, clear and convincing evidence, that they are dangerous. But the bail part of it is, the other goals are to assure that we're not holding people who don't need to be held, for whom it's really not worth it. So what we want to see is whether we're accomplishing those two major goals.
Well, some people might say if you don't want to pay bail, if you can't afford bail, don't commit a crime. What would you say to them?
Well, look, what is bail about? Bail is about assuring that somebody's going to return to court. And we don't want to hold somebody unless they've been convicted of a crime. The court has an inherent power to hold people to assure that they return, but we won't want to do that unless we really have to. So we want to push down that number of people being held in two ways. First of all, let's find other ways to bring people back to court. Let's remind them and so forth. And second, and this is something that's really up to the district attorneys to do, let's not handle things criminally if it's a mental health issue, if it's an addiction issue. Let's try to get people into a different system.
So increasingly, we've seen that those are the case in a lot of cases. Now, in California, let's talk about what happened there, because California has gone further, and they just became the first state in the nation to eliminate bail altogether. They have no bail, and so here's how it works. People who are arrested and charged with a crime never have to put up bail, and instead local courts decide whom to hold, whom to release while they await trial, as you say. And it'll be based on, we're going to put up here a couple of the criteria, a score of how likely they are to show up at court, seriousness of the crime, likelihood of reoffending, these kinds of issues. And so, do you think Massachusetts should go this way? Should we do this and get rid of bail altogether, or do you think California went too far?
Well, I'm not sure. I wouldn't frame it as they went too far, or we didn't go far enough. Either way, because it really depends on how they implement it, right? Because they're maintaining the concept that the courts have the inherent ability to hold people. They're just saying, we're not going to do it using money.
Right.
And so we don't know whether they're going to hold more people or less people.
In theory, more people could end up being held if you have a no
It's
bail
entirely possible, and and so the other element is that they're going to this mechanical risk scoring concept, which is something we've given a lot of thought to in Massachusetts, and you know that can backfire too. So I think we need to keep looking at it. It's one of those things we need to keep monitoring. But I actually think this idea of getting rid of bail is something that kind of turns the issue on its head, really, because bail is a right. We have a right to say, look, I'm coming back. You don't trust me? Take my house. That is a right.
You have a right to be released.
You have a right to be released on bail, and that's something that people fought for hundreds of years in England, and that we preserved in our earlier colonial concepts. Some of our earliest decisions say bail is a right that people have. What's wrong is unaffordable bail set on the wrong cases, and that's what we need to try to get away from.
Well, you said there's a commission to study this. We will see how it goes in the future. We'll have you back on, and you can tell us how it's working out. Senator William Brownsberger, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you so
for having
much.
us.
One thing we do know, it's going to be really hot again tomorrow.
We do know